is AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. Now, almost 2 years now since 7 October 2023, Israel's relentless war has shown zero signs of slowing down. In just this week, in 3 days, Israel has carried out strikes against 6 countries. That's Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Tunisia, Yemen, and of course, Qatar. The unprecedented airstrike in Doha, Qatar, sent shockwaves not just in the region but across the world, raising critical questions about how far the international community will allow Israel to continue this war and this violence, and what it means for the ceasefire talks, with Qatar still playing its role as a key mediator. And we're very pleased to have with us in the studio to help us unpack some of these key questions, Rowena Abdul Razak, lecturer in Middle East History at the School of Oriental and African Studies. So thank you so much, Rowena. We've had interviews virtually, but we're very pleased to have you in the studio with us today. And of course, we want to talk about what's happened, what's transpired in the past few days, not just with Qatar, but in Yemen as well. But what's unprecedented is that this is Israel's first direct attack on Qatari soil. How significant is this moment in the region? And I guess just your initial reactions on what's happened.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here in person in the studio. It's quite incredible. I mean, that Israel is really trying to push as far as it can. The boundaries that it's willing to push, it's just incredible. The attack on Tehran we thought was already bad. But now directly attacking Qatar, a key US ally, is quite shocking. So the initial reaction is one of shock. I think Qatar probably didn't see it coming, although this is not an attack that happened overnight. This kind of attack takes months of planning, so clearly Israel had been thinking about doing this attack and carrying out this attack. So the fact that it's happened just means that it is serious, or is not serious about a ceasefire negotiation, that it does not care what the international community thinks of it, doesn't even care what the US thinks of it. So it's just one of shock and just surprise, not even surprise anymore at this point, really.
But how do you think this makes it any different from what Israel has done in the past? Like as I've said, we've seen some unprecedented attacks before, just in recent months with the attacks in Tehran, in Iran. But what makes this different?
The difference is that this is a key US ally. Qatar has bases, US bases on its soil. Qatar is a very important negotiator in the ceasefire discussions, also with regards to Gaza. Qatar is a key player in the region. So not only is Israel attacking someone that it has been in negotiations with, which makes Israel, quite frankly, just someone completely untrustworthy, it also shows that that it really, as I said already, doesn't care. But Qatar is a very important player in the Middle East, in the region, not just in the region, but in the Middle East in general. It is also has good relations with Iran, has good relations with, has had poor relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the past, but that has improved in recent months and in recent months. So it is an indication that Israel is very keen on destabilizing the region. It is not. And even though there's been calls to make sure that this doesn't escalate, Israel is very keen to make sure that the chaos continues for various reasons, because it wants to continue its campaign in Gaza. Netanyahu is facing corruption charges. I think he appeared in court just a few days ago. So there is a need for Israel to continue its chaos. Sorry, no, I've sort of drifted away from the question, but I think we need to sort of see it and contextualize this attack in a bigger picture.
You pointed out some really important points there. And as you said, it's not as if Israel cares or gives a care much for the consequences that's to come, not with its relationship with the US and of course in the region. But for various reasons, as you said, this instability is deliberate, right? But going back to the role that Qatar plays as the key mediator in the ceasefire talks between Hamas and Israel as well, what does this mean then? How does this play out in the context of the ceasefire, or has Israel just long given up on that?
I think what's quite interesting is that Qatar is a very measured player. It's been attacked. it's not downplaying the seriousness of this attack. You know, there were casualties. Maybe the Hamas leadership wasn't killed, but I think the son was killed. The son of the key Hamas negotiator was killed. So this is not insignificant on that part. But Qatar has pledged to continue its role as a mediator, showing that Qatar is trying to play the bigger part here, which is quite important. Qatar Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, I believe, has actually even said that this is part of Qatari identity, that it wants to play this role as negotiator, it wants to continue its role. It has said that it reserves the right to retaliate, but as far as the ceasefire and its role as mediator is concerned, that's going to continue. And I think that says a lot about Qatar. It puts Israel in an even worse light already, because here they are. They were at the negotiating table just a few days ago. Trump and Israel had more or less accepted Trump's terms of a ceasefire, and then just yesterday, well, just very recently, it's launched an attack on Qatar. So it's shown itself to be just a dishonest player, you know. So, but for Qatar, it's remained and wants to stay true to its role as mediator, which I think is great. You
mentioned about how this paints Israel in a bad light, not that it hasn't already been tainted by so many past incidents before, but talking about the notion of narrative and the notion of perception, could you see what Israel has done with these unprecedented attacks? Do you see this backfire potentially by strengthening Hamas's narrative and rallying even more regional support for the group, perhaps even across the region or beyond the region?
It's quite interesting when we see how various players in the region has reacted. I mean, there's been very clear condemnation on Qatar's, the violation on Qatar's sovereignty from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, everyone has come up strongly in solidarity with Qatar. They have been quite careful about Hamas, in the sense that the rhetoric has been to support Qatar, and Qatar wants a regional and collective response, but countries are still not 100% saying we're going to support Hamas completely. Having said that, of course, the usual allies of Hamas have obviously come up in support of Hamas, whether it's Iran, whether it's Malaysia as well, but at the same time, I think there's still caution about how to deal with Hamas and how to manage it.
Going back to how Qatar has now framed this, it's described this attack in various ways, but one of it, Qatar has called this a flagrant violation of sovereignty and international law. Just touching briefly on international law, how strong do you think is the legal case against Israel here, or are we just beyond that point of return already?
It's quite unfortunate because it's very clear that Israel has violated many kinds of international law, whether it's the genocide itself in Gaza, how it's conducted its war in Gaza, I mean, the ICJ has called the occupation unlawful, the UN Special Committee has found Israel guilty of genocide, so it's all very clear. And now this is a clear violation of a foreign country's sovereignty. They're sending missiles, and it's not just even sending missiles. I think Israel even used planes, so they had flown through airspace of different countries to get to it. So we're looking at various violations of rules of engagement and rules of conflict and war. So that's clear. It's the implementation of international law which has always been very, very tricky. And I mean, just recently, Israeli President Herzog, he's in the United Kingdom. He shook hands with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. What does that say about the international community? They may condemn. Whether they implement is another matter. So yes, they're against international law, but the implementation of international law is notoriously difficult.
As we've touched on this, Qatar, what makes this sort of unprecedented and what makes this different than what's happened before is Qatar being a key US ally in the region. How do you expect the US to play this out? I mean, there's a lot at play here, of course, not just with Qatar's role, but with President Trump, him vying for the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's out the window at this point. But yeah, how do you think they will play this one out?
The US is under a lot of pressure at the moment. Just recently, Trump's key ally, Charles Kirk, I believe, was assassinated. There is a lot of his policies are facing backlash. So the US is under Trump's presidency is kind of falling apart in the best possible way, I suppose, of saying that. And internationally, Trump, obviously he wants to play this role as peacekeeper, as someone who can promote peace. He's very keen on overseeing a lasting ceasefire, a meaningful ceasefire. But Israel's attack on Qatar has embarrassed him, frankly. He's very embarrassed, he's very upset. He knew of the attack beforehand, but only informed Qatar a little bit too late. I believe 10 minutes after the attack started, only then did, I believe the Middle East Special Envoy actually told Qatar. So the US is in a very difficult position, and judging from what it has done before in the past with Iran, it's possible that the US may not do very much. At most, it might allow for a controlled response from Qatar, maybe, like how it did with Iran, where it allowed Iran to attack its bases and all that. It was all very controlled. The US might allow for something like that. But at the same time, I think the US is, particularly Trump, is not keen to derail the negotiation process or the ceasefire negotiations. So it looks like they'll probably, say a lot in terms of we're very upset. They're very upset of what Israel did. They're not happy with Netanyahu. But at the same time, I think they'll probably want the ceasefire to continue, and they'll probably not allow for much more to derail from that, if that makes sense.
Well, what do you mean in that sense, that there might be this sort of controlled response that's allowed by the US? How does that actually work?
It's the same way in the sense that when Israel attacked Iran and Iran retaliated by sending missiles to the base, that was all very controlled in the sense that it was a very direct response. Iran told the US in advance, the US told Qatar in advance. So I won't say it's necessarily performative per se, but it's certainly a kind of performance in the sense that Iran is able to show that it has responded to Israel, but done in a very controlled setting where it doesn't lead to further escalation. Qatar's sovereignty has been violated. Qatar has the right to respond. So if Qatar wishes to do so, the US might, and this is all very maybe, might allow for Qatar to respond to Israel, but in a way that doesn't escalate the situation. It doesn't cause further destabilization of the negotiation process. This can include anything from Qatar sending missiles to Israel in advance. Qatar wouldn't attack the US, that doesn't make sense, but probably Qatar attacking Israel in some way.
The official details of the Doha attack hasn't all come out yet, but of course there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of information being shared on social media among security commentators and followers, and there's a lot of say about how this attack actually played out, and that it could be controlled in the sense that I think the US has stated that there were warnings that came before the attack.
Yes.
So how unprecedented and how unexpected did this attack come?
It was unprecedented to an extent, I think, that no one really thought that Israel would go out, actually attack a mediator. And they're currently in negotiations right now, for a ceasefire. So, but at the same time, it's not outside of Israel's playbook. Israel has done very bizarre and bizarre things.
You tried to hold your tongue.
Yeah,
there.
Yes, exactly. It's sort of very strange and odd things. But to say it's unprecedented, unexpected, perhaps not. But it is surprising because it is Qatar is a key US ally. It would be strange for Israel to attack Iran. You can understand. But Israel to attack Qatar, it's a very surprising move, let's say. But as I said, this was something that has been in the works for months. It doesn't just happen overnight. Netanyahu, this I think it was called the Summit of Fire. I believe that's the name of the mission. That has been going on for a long time. The US claims it didn't know about it until the attack, just before the attacks happened. But yeah, it's a bit, I would say it's surprising, but not unexpected.
Going back to how Qatar has put out several statements to describe this or to sort of frame this, Qatar's leadership has also suggested that this may be a turning point for regional unity against Israel. Do you think that this attack could then potentially galvanize states in the region into a more stronger and more coordinated action, or do you think the responses will remain mostly rhetorical? Do you think this is the sort of nail in the coffin or the turning point? Or
the hope is always that the region has come together in terms of its statements, in terms of showing solidarity, but it's still quite, for lack of a better word, cliquey. You have Qatar and Iran, who, even though there was some misunderstanding, there's some tension because of Iran's attack on Qatar, on the military base, the U.S. military base in Qatar, so that did cause some friction. But just under a week ago, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was actually in Doha to improve relations, and they've come together again very strongly against Israel. They've reinforced their alliance. They have shown support for Hamas and all of these things. So Iran and Qatar have sort of come together. So you've got that alliance quite strongly. But the rest of the region, it's still complex and it's very complicated because Saudi Arabia doesn't have, it's improved its relations with Qatar, it's improved its relations with Iran, but there's still tension. It's always like, which is the worst enemy? Is it Iran necessarily, or is it Israel? And even before October 7th, we did see an improvement of relations between the UAE, Saudi Arabia and Israel. And even though that's maybe on hold a little bit, that might still be the long-term wish. So I think a lot of countries are still going to be quite careful and look out for their national interests rather than regional interests, or to have a kind of united front. Having said that, the rhetoric is important. That kind of solidarity is also important. So, the fact that Saudi Arabia, UAE, the brothers of the Gulf, let's say, they have come together in various ways. But there is still underlying tension of whether they will do something collectively, even though that's what Qatar wants, whether that's what it gets. I suspect it's more going to be Qatar plus Iran rather than Qatar plus the other Arab Gulf states.
So you think the sort of loose factions and ties will more or less remain?
I believe so, yeah. But it remains to be seen. As I said, I think national interests of each individual state is still paramount. Whether they want to do something collectively and regionally remains to be seen.
Qatar has hinted at that, but do you think it's enough to sort of galvanize the other states to move together?
At the moment, it's hard to say. Iran is the main player that might do something together with Qatar. They have in the past, they can in the past. As I said, they've shown that they want that relationship to thrive and continue. So we've got that regional response perhaps on the table. Whether that includes other Arab Gulf states remains to be seen. It's hard to say at the moment. You must remember that all of these other countries have good relations with the US and they may not want to jeopardize that. So everyone's going to play a very cautious and careful game.
What about beyond the region then, among especially Western countries? We've seen sort of a wave of Palestinian recognition among Western countries. Do you think that this momentum will go on, given what's happened?
Oh yeah, and I think that it's actually gaining momentum as well. We have Spain, Germany, they've all sort of come up very strongly against Israel. They've imposed sanctions on arms and weapons. The EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has also come up just a few days ago against Israel. So there is a very important response, which is that's new. I think they've allowed Israel a lot of leverage, but now it's just too much. But just briefly, to go back to your earlier question, I should have mentioned that there is Yemen, of course. So in terms of a regional response, it should also possibly, could it possibly include Yemen, even though Yemen has been under attack quite quite severely, they would probably, in any kind of regional response, would include sort of traditional Qatar allies like Yemen, possibly, you know, Hezbollah as well. You know, we still have those traditional allies. It's just with regards to bigger countries like Saudi Arabia and all of that might be a bit tricky, but we do have Yemen as well. But, yeah.
I think from the perspective of, I guess, mainstream thought, there's a lot of talk, I guess, of course, there's a lot of attention that's turned towards the Gaza aid flotilla as well.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Do you think that that has anything to do with any of the factors that led up to this attack?
It's possible. I mean, everything's coming at a particular moment in time, right? So the Gaza flotilla, you know, they've also been under attack, unfortunately. So, I mean, but this is not common. They did that for the previous flotilla as well. It's just everything's coming at this moment, which coincides, I believe, with what's happening with Israel, with Netanyahu's corruption trial. This is a very useful distraction. Israel is under a lot of pressure because it's gaining a lot of backlash from the international community. Its former allies, you know, countries like the EU, Germany, and all of these countries, you know, all of these international bodies and organizations and countries are now speaking out against Israel. So they're very much backed in a corner. And their reaction is to be very aggressive, to be even more aggressive. The attack on Qatar, as I said, it's been in planning for months. It's come at a good time for Israel because now it's able to distract further. It's able to be even more aggressive because it distracts people from what's happening in Gaza and so on. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It is all happening all at once, everything everywhere all at once, really. And it's sort of like a ticking time bomb as well with the issue of starvation in Gaza as well. I know, as you said, it's very hard to predict what could come next, what Israel could pull out of its cards, but do you see anything happening or playing out in the next few months that we could expect potentially from Israel or from the US?
A ceasefire would be the obvious thing. Having said that, though, with imposed sanctions, the EU, again, the EU, which is quite an important organization, I think, to actually come up recently against Israel, I think that's quite important. It's possible that Israel will start to feel the pressure. At the end of the day, with less arms coming its way, less money coming its way, that means it's going to be hard-pressed to continue its campaign in Gaza. America's still, the US is still backing them, and that's always going to be a bit of a difficult one to manage. But the hope is that aid finally comes true in a better flow. But it's still hard to say. I think this is a long, drawn-out campaign by Israel to starve out Gaza. I think that's what it really wants to do, is to starve out Gaza, to effectively empty the land. And this is tricky because I think its long-term goal is to kind of string along as long as it can, so that it can achieve that final goal. The best thing that can happen is for the sanctions to continue, the embargo to continue, pressure to continue, and potentially a proper ceasefire. And I think that's why Qatar keeping its mediator role, despite what's happened to them, is very, very important.
We are coming to the end of the show, but I do want to briefly touch on the role that's been played by the international community that's beyond government, but the sort of movements that we're seeing among people, the sort of shift in mainstream thought, the growing and continued support that we're seeing from people rallying and demonstrating on the streets. It is now coming to almost 2 years since 7th October, although this, of course, conflict and this issue extends far beyond that. But I guess, what are some of your thoughts on the kind of solidarity that we're seeing that is really hard to come by? Trends move so fast and we move on from one conflict to the other. I mean, our attention span is just really messed up, to be honest. And so to see the kind of momentum that's stayed on with the Palestinian people, what are some of your thoughts on that?
I think it's incredible. The fact that this has, as you said, gained momentum and has stayed consistent for 2 years is quite important. I think back to South Africa you know, the anti-apartheid movement and how consistent that was. I mean, it was something that everyone knew about, but it was only in the last few years that it really gained momentum. So we're seeing a very similar pattern happening here. I think it's not going to die down in any way. I think it's going to keep going. And what's really important, I mean, one thing good about the TikTok generation is that they're more aware of what's happening. They're more exposed to the demonstrations, what's happening in Gaza, So they're definitely more aware of what's happening, and they feel connected to other people on having a similar cause and having a similar fight. So I wouldn't underestimate the people's movements and its impact on governmental policy.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. Plenty more we'd like to discuss, of course, but that's all the time that we have today. We hope to have you to join us again another time. That is all on AWANI Global this week with me, Nailah Huda. We'll catch you another time.